What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. This guy that you're looking at here probably looks familiar. I had him on in episode 72, I think, but it was an abbreviated one. It was during the season when we had a season. And so I only had a limited amount of time. But now that we're all stuck in our houses, Coach had a little bit of free time and agreed to come back on the show, and I'm very thankful for that. So, Coach Berube, thank you very much for making yourself available. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matt. Appreciate it.
It's we're in some weird times, man. This is I put everything in context as much as I possibly can. I've been in the military, been in combat, been in wars, been in law enforcement for almost 30 years, and raising my kids, and I've been around the world, and I believe that everything that we're seeing right now is the first that I've ever witnessed. I've seen a ton of shit, but this is the first time I've ever seen something this insane. How about you?
Yeah, well, for me, big time for sure. You've been in a different situation, obviously. With some of the stuff you've been around and seen is way more intense and severe than I have. But this is different, boy. I'd not be able to just have a routine and go to work. And I know we all complain about work at times, but we sure miss it now. I mean, it's tough, but from my perspective, this is bigger than a sporting event for sure. I'm involved in sports. That's my life. But, we got to make sure we're doing the right thing and then getting this under control. So sports is secondary.
Yeah, for me, it's just I've been very all over the place and mentally about this whole thing, and just trying to make sense as to why this versus any of the other things that have happened in the past, and how did we end up essentially shutting the world down for better, 150 countries or whatever it is are pretty much in some sort of a lockdown, and our country in specific, we are the land of the free, home of the brave, and it's like all that has been sort of put into a box, and we're sort of in this weird space where you can go out, but you can't go out, and you have to go out. If you go out and you don't go out with a mask, you're sort of looked at like an asshole. And like, there's all these, everything all of a sudden in 1 month or 6 weeks has been flipped upside down. And it's sad in a lot of respects, but as a cop, I'm still going to work every day. And I get to see more than most people do because I'm out driving around in my community, but it's just a very weird time. And I'm hoping, I've done a lot of studying into this and research. As a cop, even though I work 50 hours a week, I also own an fitness equipment manufacturing, and a gym. So I'm 50% less busy now than I ever was before, even working 50 hours a week. So I have all this free time to sort of research and look at numbers and figure out where the trends are. And it's, while it's kind of a twisted way to look at this whole thing in a scientific mathematical equation kind of way, it's what's keeping it logical and in perspective in my head.
Yeah. It's definitely, like you said, it's you go out, you get a weird feeling almost, nobody's ever seen anything like this. Nobody. It's not, the world or, most of the world's never been shut down like this. So nobody's, it's all new to everybody. And, it is kind of a freaky thing when you go out and you got a mask on or you don't have a mask on, and how you're perceived or how you're looked at. And, people get freaked out, boy. I'll tell you, it's not easy.
Well, I'm hoping that at some point in time we bring back, and I'm envisioning it's going to be in the next 2 to 3 weeks that we start to see, maybe not where we are, we're both in Pennsylvania, the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area is probably going to be one of the last ones to be completely restriction free, just simply because of I think the population density of our area. California is going to be probably similar, and Washington and the areas where they were hit hard early on. But I envision we're going to start to see some semblance of a return to normalcy. And one of the things that I think, while it's not in the grand scheme of life, a hockey game or a baseball game or a football game isn't the most impactful thing in someone's life on a daily basis. But when you're looking at a picture of normalcy, when you can have a distraction that sports are to most people's daily lives, and you get a chance to just break free mentally for 2 hours and watch a hockey game or a baseball game, or sometimes they're 3 hours, but you get that release. And that's kind of like the national pastime of America is sports. And obviously as the head coach of the St. Louis Blues and an NHL veteran for decades, you understand the value of providing that to the fans that are fans of your specific team, but also the country.
Oh, definitely. It's huge. I mean, people love sports, and in this country, they love all the sports, and like you said, it's 2 to 3 hours of something they can get glued to on TV or go to a game. Bring their families. It's a big thing. Sports is huge in this country. It's huge in a lot of countries, but it's huge here, and it's a big part of the culture and what's going on. And now it's gone. Like it's tough. If you go to turn the TV on, you can't watch a game. I mean, people, that's what they want to do. That's important to them. And it's a day-to-day routine for them that they could come home at night or whatever, or during the day and watch a game, pass the time for 2-3 hours with their family or, their kids and stuff. But that's no more. We're watching reruns. And so I'm with you. Sooner and better we get back to normal here and get people back to work, get back to getting out and getting the sports back going. It'll be better for everybody.
I agree. So let me, I asked this the first time we had the show, and you probably don't remember your answer, but I ask it to everybody that comes on the show. I asked one question. That question is, who is Craig Berube? Like, what would you define yourself as if you had an opening statement, your elevator pitch on who you are?
Well, I think, I'm a sports guy, I guess. I love sports. It's funny. I'm just going to talk about this a little bit. Since this has been going on, I've gotten into TV shows, watching the Ozarks, the Tiger King, things like that, which I would never watch. I don't watch that stuff. I watch sports. That's what I am, a sports guy. I've been a sports guy my whole life. Grow up playing sports. Love to watch sports, watch all different kinds of sports. I watch them all, love them all, and I'm a father. I got a family. I got a girlfriend with kids. I have 3 kids of my own, so I'm a family guy. Spend a lot of time with the kids, and this has actually been nice for me in one way, because usually I'm alone in St. Louis doing my job and the family's here, but I'm spending time with them right now, which I normally don't get to do. So it's kind of nice to be around the kids and the girlfriend and spending time with them and doing things like that. So that's basically who I am. The sports is my life, 24/7 pretty much. I'm 54 years old and I'm still involved in the game, and I want to continue to be involved in the game as long as I can as a coach.
Well, I think, I think every single person can sort of, we have, 10 million people or 16 million people in unemployment, whatever the number was. Everybody right now is for the most part, I'm lucky I have a job that, aliens can come and I still got to go to work. So
yeah.
there isn't a day where I'm not going to have to go to work as long as I'm still a cop. But for the most part, people that have jobs that are not life or death driven, are not working. And that goes for, $100 million athletes to the guy, that makes $15 an hour is just trying to make ends meet. Everybody's sort of in the same spot. So whether your financial security levels obviously are different levels, but everybody's sort of feeling that same sense of missing whatever it was that was their normal identity. And I think one thing that's coming from this, and I have, I've received this level of satisfaction and comfort, is that I'm getting to be more connected to the ones that I want to be more connected with, that I've always said I wish I could be more connected or be more available or more present. And that's not happened. That didn't happen on a daily basis because of life just got in the way. But I'm going for walks every day with my daughter, and we just talk, and we have a great time. That she's normally at school, so I don't. She's at college, so this is like a rare moment to really capture some potentially what would have been lost time with the people that have either sacrificed and allowed you to become, Stanley Cup head coach, or me to grow my businesses or serve my communities. They have to sacrifice time with us, and this is our chance to reconnect and give that back to them.
Yeah, definitely. And you you got to take the positives out of everything. And it's hard, right now. But again, like you said, there's certain things you get to spend more time at home with your family, if you have one, and your kids and things like that. So it's been good for me. Like even, with the school part, I got to do the school with them every day. And, that's good. That's just, it's a challenge, a little bit of a challenge, but it's good for me, and it's good to be able that I can do that. And, use my brain that way a little bit, which I never do. So just stuff like that. It's different, but it's good that I get to do that now. So there is some positive that can come out of everything.
Well, let's go back to where the hockey season ended abruptly. Everything ended abruptly. It was literally like, and I don't know if you were paying attention or not, but the NCAA for the winter sports, the tournament, especially for my daughter's a college swimmer, she was actually in day 2 of her NCAAs at Division II, and it just ended. They just said, okay, no more. And, we had booked a hotel that we couldn't get our money back for. People had flown in. Division II swimming has a lot of international competitors, and a lot of families came in from different countries to see their kids swim, and, they had plane tickets, and it was just this whole abrupt ending to what we were expecting my daughter's, final NCAA appearance to be this triumphant, you did amazing, we're so proud of you, and this like culmination of 4 years of effort. Same thing with you guys. I mean, what was it like? Did you guys get a game in and then it ended, or were you going to the game? What was it like for you specifically with the Blues when you found out what happened?
Yeah, well, we're in Anaheim, and we kind of knew that this could be the last game, was what we're kind of hearing a little bit. That was that makeup game with when Jay Bullmeister went down. So we canceled that game. This was the makeup game. So going into that game, I think that, a lot of guys knew in the back of their minds that this could be the final game for a bit. They might shut it down. We were hearing different things. And then all of a sudden, we get back to St. Louis, and that's it. Season's on hold. So right away, your things are going great, for us. We've had a good year, and we're right there again, ready to compete for the cup. And, it's ended right now. So you're on hold, and you still don't know when you're going to get back. So we're in limbo quite a bit, but, it's been quite a while now. We're not sure what's going to happen. No player, nobody knows. We're secondary. The country and what's going on is more important, and we got to get everything straightened out. So we'll see what happens here. But like you said, it's the same as you and your daughter and the swimming and things. It's all of a sudden, boom, it's over. And this is where we're at.
What was it like? I know as a leader, you're well known for being a great leader of men, and that guys want to play hard for you, and they have your trust. What was it like when they made the announcement and said we're putting it on hold? Did you get a lot of guys calling saying, "Coach, what's that mean? What do we do? What's the next step?" How did you handle that?
Well, we definitely reach out to our players and talk to them. Even then and now, we're reaching out to them, whether it's myself, the Doug Armstrong, the GM, the other coaches. I'll get those guys to call players. We're constantly reaching out to them with text messages and calls and things like that. Just, you got to keep them motivated. You got to keep them going. We sent a letter out to every player, explaining the situation and what you should do about it and how you should go about your life and going forward here, with hockey in the back of your mind. So I think our guys are, preparing still. They're working out, they're training as best they can, still have hope and trying to stay focused the best they can, because they do want to play, and they want to compete for the cup again, have a chance to repeat. So they're a pretty motivated group of guys. And like you said, from the leadership standpoint, us as an organization, starting with myself and Doug Armstrong, we constantly just try to stay in touch with our players. That's all we can do right now. And, help them if they need something, or just you try to work with them the best we can.
So I know in hockey is a very much an international sport. There's players from Europe, from Russia, from Czech, from Canada. For the ones that stayed in America, the ones that didn't go back to their home country, how much more difficult is it for them knowing that they have family back home? Have you had any of the guys talk to you about that, like the just the emotional and stressful difficulty of not knowing what's going on wherever they're from.
Well, yeah, and we've had some guys that are in Canada that went back home to their families. I think most of the guys are in pretty good shape that way with their families. But you're right. There's, obviously, we have Russians that they got families back in Russia and stuff like that. But they all seem to be pretty good. I know that even Alexander Steen's got a couple boys up in Sweden from his first marriage. So they're, and he's in St. Louis. And but I think they're doing pretty good. Like, just talking to them, they seem fine, and they seem that everything's in good order with their families, whether they're in Sweden or Russia or whatever. So our guys seem pretty good about it. But that was a good question, because you're right. These guys, they're away from home. Their homes, their mothers and fathers, and if they have sisters or brothers, they're up in maybe Russia, Sweden, Finland, somewhere. And they're in St. Louis. So long way away from each other, but they seem to be doing okay.
Good. That's always, I always wonder, I have she's like my sister. I grew up with her and we lived together. My mom and her mom, best friends. We were poor growing up, so we all lived together and growing up. And so she's like my sister, and she lives in the Netherlands. So and she used to live in China,
Okay.
and her ex-husband lives in China. So there's just all this. I get a lot of my information from her on what it's like in the country that she's in, whether it was in China before or now in the Netherlands. And it stresses me out knowing that I know how America handles stuff. I know how we deal with things, but I don't always, you see, the Netherlands, you see the windmills and the tulips and everything's all pretty and beautiful and all the canals. But I don't know whether or not, medically, if socialized medicine or how their government handles things, whether or not she's safer there or here, which causes me stress. So I can only imagine as a professional athlete who had to make a choice on whether or not, because you don't know how long you're going to be out, and you don't know how long travel restrictions are going to be. So if by chance the NHL starts back up, mid-May, they wouldn't be able to get back here to play, which could have created a lot of drama.
Yeah, no,
so
that's a good question. I was on with my coaching staff today, and we brought that up about, quarantine and things like that when they're traveling from Canada or Europe back here. The league's obviously going to cover that, because there's guys that are all over the place, and they're going to have to get back to their cities where they play. So there's obviously they thought of that, and they'll figure it out.
That's good. So let me ask you this. So, baseball was talking about doing games in the spring training areas, Arizona and Florida, and sort of not doing the American League, National League, because there's a mix of each in each one of those areas, and playing to empty stadiums. What are your thoughts? What do you think the impact would be if the NHL came back and you played in front of no fans? Like, how hard that, to me, it's almost mind blowing to think that the same effort, intensity, and production can be created in an area where there's no one cheering you on,
Yeah, it'll be difficult. It'll be different for sure. That's a possibility, though, that could happen, and we could go to a neutral site and play a tournament type playoff series. Who knows what they're going to come up with? But again, you're just going to have to deal with what you got to deal with, and if we have to do it in front of no fans, then you as a coach, you're going to have to motivate your team a lot more than you normally do, because without the fans there, and home ice and all that kind of stuff, the motivation level's not going to be as high. I mean, as an athlete, you want to play in front of people. That's important. The crowds are huge and they're important. They make a lot of it go. And if you have to go and play in front of no fans, we're going to have to find a different way to motivate our athletes. That's for sure. And an athlete's going to have to find a different way to motivate himself.
That's going to be hard. I mean, I work with swimmers a lot and individual athletes that a lot of the impact of a crowd, outside of mom and dad being there and wanting to do well for your family, but the impact of a crowd doesn't exist. So you have to work on a lot of the internal mechanisms on how do they retain focus and preparation and execution and all those things that come into an elite athlete's ability to perform. Especially, it's different though for individuals than it is team. I mean, I just think there's just a complete different set of circumstances that are, you still have to have the same level of intensity and focus and preparation, but on an individual level, like a swimmer, my daughter's a distance swimmer. So everything's based on, understanding her stroke count and how many strokes do I need for a 50-yard, how quick is my arm turns, like all those things come into play that really have nothing to do with anything else other than her own effort and attention to detail. But for a team sport where energy, you always talk the energy in the room. That's a big hockey term.
Yeah.
That's a real thing. How do you think as a leader, you're going to be able to get these guys to artificially, I guess is the best way to put it, create that energy and maintain it for an entire hockey game?
Yeah, well, you're going to have to ask your leaders to really step up and create a lot of that energy for sure. But, the way I look at it, it's you have an opportunity to win something a different way. And that should be motivation. Like it's difficult. It's not an easy, it's not easy. And it's going to be more difficult for sure. I don't care what anybody says. If we go to a neutral site and we play without fans, it's going to be more difficult for everybody. So the way I look at it is, as a coach, to get your team to think about if you win and how you win it. It'll never ever be done again this way.
That is
it'll probably never be done again this way. So you have a chance to, be a repeat Stanley Cup champion, and you're probably going to do it in a way that it'll never ever happen again.
That is a brilliant answer.
You got to come up with things like that because that's what your team's going to need to be highly motivated and get out there. Your team's going to have to play extremely hard. If this goes on, you got to play hard and you got to compete.
I think there's that's a fucking fantastic answer. But it's almost similar to the team that's never won, right? Like the Cleveland Browns that have never won a title. And they're getting good, and you sense there's some momentum and the potential's there that they feed off of we've never done this before. It's like here in Philly with the Eagles. They won NFL championships before there was the Super Bowl, but they'd never won a Super Bowl. And the hungry dogs eat, run faster, the underdog mass, that whole thing was almost self-created motivation to do the thing that no one thought they could ever do and do it for the first time in the history of the franchise. So I think that's almost identical to the motivate. You just flip it on its head and say, this will never probably be done again. Not that you've never done it. It'll never happen again. And you have the chance to be the ones that set that bar and never come off that pedestal.
Oh, definitely. And I go back to last year with our team going into the playoffs. This team was a highly motivated team, boy, that believed that they could win and that they had an opportunity to win. And as each series went along, they just became hungrier and hungrier. We went into that San Jose series. I don't think there's too many people that probably picked us to come out winners out of that series. And we just hammered that team. Like we beat them up physically because our guys knew we were right there. They could taste it. One more round, we're in the Stanley Cup final. So our team, they were motivated. Like you said, to win the first championship in the history of the Blues.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I love.
And that's big time motivation. Something like that.
I think you can almost create an identity of because each team every year you have some of the same players, but there's always new players coming in, players getting traded, retirements, whatever. There's always some change to the structure of a team. So each team has a chance to have its own first. And, you look at the Flyers from the 70s when they played the Russians and beat the Russians. Like, that's never happened again.
Yeah.
Because the Soviet Union was never that again. Like, it ended. So no one will ever be able to do what they did and tout that. And having that sense of we have a chance to do something that has never once been done before. It's such, and if you have the talent to then go execute on it. But if you have all those things in place, and then it just comes down to motivation and where do you draw inspiration from? That's your source. That's how you get that. That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you totally.
So let's shift gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about where we're at now with the pandemic and all that nonsense. Let's go back a little bit and talk about, because we touched on it the last time you were on the show about fighting and and how the game went from a very physical component to a more finesse game, during the Gretzky era. And but there was always, you always had the component of the enforcer. And recently that sort of died. There isn't, they don't have the Craig Berube on the team anymore. If you do, it's very few teams have that guy. When you were in your prime, when you were in your prime playing for the Flyers and the Caps, what was your self-motivation to become the very best or the most feared, or whatever term you want to use for the enforcer, to be that guy?
Yeah, I think that, night in and night out, I think I really wanted to just make sure that I proved myself. I really did. There's always going to be times, every game you got somebody you probably have to go at it with, fight. But I wanted to just make sure I proved myself game in and game out, year after year. I think that's a big part of why I played as long as I did as that type of player, because I just wanted to keep proving myself. And I went into every training camp trying to prove myself again and again, and try to become a little bit better of a player over time, which I did, and play just a little bit bigger of a role on a team.
Well, you went from not just, people may not recognize that, but you had some scoring ability. Like, you were a hockey player. You weren't just some guy that, you weren't Mike Tyson on skates. You had hockey skills. You scored 20 goals, I believe, right?
No, I never got to 20 in 1 year. But, what I did was I became a checker, and with the ability still to do my job as a fighter and protect people and do that side of things. But I got a role as a checker on a team. And that was good with me, because I had a role on a team other than what I was before, just a fighter. And I'd play against top lines and other teams, and try to shut them down and do my job that way. And that was really motivating for me, to be able to come to the rink with a different role like that, and also still do my other job. I still did my other job right to the end, but I had that role, which was good for me. And that was motivation for me to become a better player over time.
One of the, I like pulling up old Flyer hockey fights, especially when it was the bench clears, when everybody, no matter, just was next line comes out and everybody's fighting those. One of the best ones that I remember you were part of, but you didn't really get as much of a chance at the top guy on that one, was against Ottawa. And there was the bench clear, which just kept on going and going until there was nobody left, essentially. And there was another guy, I can't remember, the taller, light-skinned black guy that was on the team. That was also McCarthy. Was it McCarthy that was on the team with you?
Sandy McCarthy was on the team with me, yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, sometimes they blend together, but I think he was on the ice when the initial foray happened with Ottawa. And you went to go after the guy, and then he grabbed, I forget who the big fighter was for Ottawa, but the McCarthy went at it, and then you ended up just knocking like 3 different guys out. And then Robert Esch came down. It was a whole big, I think it was probably 96, maybe, if I'm trying to remember correctly. You remember that one?
I think it was a little bit later than that. I thought it was Toronto, but maybe it was Ottawa. But anyways, it was one of those teams. But Sandy and I, McCarthy, we played together in the Flyers. He was great. I played with him in Calgary too, actually, and he was a tough guy. It was good to have him on the team. Pretty good 1-2 combination going out there every night.
Yeah, he did.
It was nice to have him. We had a brawl in Calgary when I was playing there one time, and I started it, and then I was in the penalty box for most of the brawl. And I looked over at the bench at one point, and there was 3 guys on each bench left, and I was in the penalty box. So I got a good seat for all the action. It was pretty funny.
Well, I remember Hitchcock. The one I was thinking of was Hitchcock was the coach. It was whenever time that period that was.
I think that was Ottawa with Hitch as the coach.
So Hitch was the coach, and I just remember there was this and I want to know, the reason why I asked this question is I want to know when you're on the bench and there's a timeout or whatever, and Hitch, what does he say? Like, this is going to get, listen, boys, this is going to get ugly real quick. This is what we're going to do. And it just they kept looking, Hitch kept looking at the Ottawa coach. It was like they were just like, what's next? And then next one, he's like, all right. And then
Yeah.
how does that communicate?
Yeah, they don't have to say much. The players all know. They really do, and they know what they got to do, and they know what's going to happen. They just go out there and they're prepared for it because they know. They're not stupid. They know what's going on, and they know it's not going to stop right away. So when they're going out there, they're prepared for what's going to happen. The coach really doesn't have to say a whole lot, to be honest with you.
I remember in that one fight, Leclerc, so that they stopped it, and whoever put the video montage together put in where you could tell the announcer, like, look, I guess they had called a timeout, and Hitch is about ready to send guys out, and Leclerc's going out, and he must have said something to Leclerc, and he rolled his eyes like, oh shit, like I got to go out. Like, I don't want to fight, but he must have been told, yeah, you're gonna have to strap up with somebody.
Yeah, I could have been. Who knows? But he's not a fighter. Johnny's a goal scorer, but in those situations when that's going on like that, you got to do something different, right? So, but especially when you had a Flyer uniform on, that was part of your role and your job, right? So they get put in difficult situations. Some of those guys that aren't used to that kind of stuff, but they're all right. They come through. They're all right.
So when you worked the Flyers, I think 2 times, 2 different segments as a player, right? Or was it 2?
2.
And then you came back and you were brought onto the coaching staff. What was your first coaching position with the Flyers? As an assistant for Roger?
The Phantoms. Yeah, the Phantoms. I went down to the Phantoms and worked with them for a few years. I was basically sitting around here and wasn't doing nothing. I was thinking about still playing, but just kind of waiting. And Paul Holmgren called me up and asked if I'd come out and work with the Phantoms a little bit. And so I actually went out there and just was skating with them and did, trying to help them all a little bit. Johnny Stevens was the head coach. I ended up playing some games that year. And then I got a call from George McPhee in Washington. He wanted me to come and interview for a coaching job there. So I went down to Wash, interviewed there. I was good friends with George. I played for him for a number of years and came back to Philly here, and Bob Clark and Paul Holmgren asked me to start coaching. They didn't want to lose me. They wanted me to stay here. So I said, sure. So I started coaching with Johnny Stevens with the Phantoms. That's how I got started.
When did you come up to the Flyers? Was it Roger? Was he the coach? Did you coach under him?
No, I played for Roger Nielsen as a player. I came up when Johnny Stevens took over as a coach when Ken Hitchcock got fired.
Gotcha. Now, at what point in time did you know that that coaching was going to be your like, this wasn't just something to kill some time because you love hockey? When did you know that being a head coach was your goal and that it was something you felt that you could be really good at? Which obviously
probably the second year as Phantom's assistant coach, I started to really you just start thinking of your own things. You start getting in the back of your mind, well, I would do it this way, I wouldn't do it that way. Those type of things really started to weigh on me about how I wanted to run things and how I would do things. So I knew deep down that I wanted to be a head coach at some point. And then eventually I went down and went up with the Flyers, but I went back down and became the head coach of the Phantoms. And that's where I started.
And you won a title.
I got it. No, I won a title as an assistant with Johnny Stevens as the head coach. But I had good success as a head coach down there. We had good teams. And then, I went back up. I ended up going back up to the Flyers with Peter Laviolette for a few years, and then I took over for him.
So we talked about this the last time, that hockey's a very relationship-driven sport on the pro level. There's a lot of, if you become a guy, and I always tell, Vince Papale's a good buddy of mine, and he's a guy that played 4 years for the Eagles as a special teamer. Wasn't, he played, I don't know, every game, but he didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to be great, right? You have one role as a gunner on the outside. You got to get down first and make a tackle. And you only get a few of those a game, and you do that over only 4 years. There's only so much impact you can make. But he's a guy that realized that he had like a cult hero status, and he took it into a career. Like, he is a beloved 100% Philadelphia sports icon.
Yeah.
And there's some people that recognize that. There's some people that Ron Jaworski is another example.
Yeah.
And I think you as well. You always seem to find yourself coming back here to the Philadelphia area, and guys like Hexy and Bobby Clark and Holmgren and those guys are lifelong Flyer guys. What is it about hockey that makes it different than say football, which is very little loyalty whatsoever from the player to the organization and reversed organization to player? What makes hockey so much different?
I'm not I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that there's a lot of ex-Flyers living around this area. They love this area. I think it's a great town, Philadelphia, for one. I think they play here and they feel, how much love there is from the fans. That's a big part of it. I think Philly's one of the best sports towns in the country. We all know that. For me, people, I still run into people that, they like to talk hockey with me and they watch me play. They knew me as a coach. They just never forget you here. I think that's a big part of it. And I think with the hockey, you got a lot of guys that come from little towns or in Canada growing up. And that's going back to the Bobby Clark days. They don't want to go back to those little towns. They like where they're living. They like, what Philadelphia brings and the success they had here. And they want to stay with that. They want to be around that. I think that's why a lot of guys stick around. Same as St. Louis. There's tons of players, ex-players that live in St. Louis. And why? It's a great sports town. It really is. The people are fantastic people. Why would they leave and go back? They don't need one. They don't want to go anywhere else. They love it there. They played there. They're loved by the fans there. And it's a great town. And that's the same as Philly. So I think that's why a lot of these ex-players in hockey are sticking around where they play.
I think it's cool. Brian Propp is a good friend of mine and had him on the show. And, he's one of the ambassadors that goes to the games and goes up to the suites and goes and meets, season ticket holders. Like, his role is really vital to that, keeping the history present, if that makes sense. Like, keeping the guys that got us to here relevant. And because hockey is a generational sport. So that meaning season tickets get handed down from dad to son, grandson to son, whatever, where you remember going as a family to games when you were a little kid and now you're 45 and you have season tickets, the same season tickets you always had. And it's this connectivity of, I think the Eagles are pretty much the same way, where it's this family driven fandom. And having the player connectivity from the past, as much as a lot of people hated that the Flyers sort of stayed in a plateau of where they could get to for a few years, and they all blamed it on Bobby Clark. I still think Bobby Clark and Paul Holmgren are the reason why hockey is still, I would say, the second most important sport in Philadelphia outside of the Eagles. And it's for a sport that attracts 16,000 a game. Imagine that being the most popular, second most popular. I think that's why.
Well, it is. I agree with you totally. And Bobby Clark, it started with Bobby as a player. Obviously, Mr. Snyder, too, the late Mr. Snyder, the great. He's a great owner. I love Mr. Snyder, and I think that, what he did for this city and hockey is unbelievable. But Bobby Clark as a player, obviously, and how great of a player he was, and staying with the organization his whole career, becoming a general manager, doing a great job as a general manager, eventually stepped down, but he's still involved with the Flyers today. And Paul Holmgren too. They've both been around for a long time with the Flyers as players. Paul coached a little bit too for the Flyers, general manager, both of them. That's what the Flyers are, is Bob Clark and Paul Holmgren, in my opinion. They bring the work ethic and the toughness and the character. They have all those things that are instilled in them, and they brought that every night as a coach, as a player, as a general manager to the organization. And that's what the Flyers are all about. And they're still both involved with the Flyers organization, which is a great thing.
So St. Louis, I've been there a few times, and it's the opposite of Philadelphia as far as personality. Like, it's if there were cousins that never met, that's who the Flyers and the Blues are, as far as the towns themselves and the way we act versus the way they act. But the passion for sports is identical, and the expectation from their teams is identical. And I think for me personally, never having been a true fan of any of the St. Louis teams, but it seems like they have that same level of passion for their sports.
Definitely. And it starts with the Cardinals, I think. Obviously, that's a great franchise. You know, they got the second most World Series titles in the history of baseball, I think, with 11 of them. So the Cardinals are, you know, that's a big-time baseball town. But, you know, where I was really surprised is how big of a hockey town it is. And you're right. The fans there are passionate as it gets. You know, in hockey and in baseball. I know they had the PGA out there. I wasn't around for that, but I heard it was incredible, the fan support for that. I know the football team, they packed that building. They love the Rams. It's unfortunate that they had to leave, but you're right. The fans are just as passionate there. They're just different. You know, they bring the passion a little bit differently. In Philly here, it can get a little abrupt at times, which I think is great, and I'm fine with it. It's just done differently in St. Louis, that's all.
Yeah, I always find it, you know, I love when I was a federal air marshal after 9/11, I traveled around, obviously that was my job, and we would do overnights in different cities, and one of my goals was always to get, if the time frame allowed for it, where we were checking into the hotel and had enough time to make it to a game, I always wanted to hit games in as many cities as I could. And one of the ones I never got a chance to do was St. Louis for either a baseball game or a hockey game. But I do love looking at the different demographics of each place I've been to and just watching how the fans, you know, just the simple act of walking in the concourse, going to the bathroom or getting something to eat is completely different in every different place I've ever been. Like how people just transition from their seat to different areas is just, it's funny to watch, because in Philadelphia, it's like it's like pandemonium in the concourse. It's not normal. Like it's just completely abnormal the way that, compared to like Seattle or Colorado or down in Texas, it's just completely different. So I always, it's on my bucket list, is one day I'll get to a St. Louis Blues game.
Yeah.
And just to watch how the fans interact, because I love watching people and the differences geographically between two different cities.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point you make about everybody's got their own personality in all these sports towns. You know, it's different in New York than it is in Philly. You know, Philly doesn't have a lot of patience. We all know that. And it's their mindset changes minute to minute almost. You know, one day they'll love you, then they don't, then they love you. I mean, that's just the way they are. And you got to accept it, because they're still, that's just the mindset here. And it's just different in each arena you go in. They're all different.
Yeah, I think in our area, we are even though you have an 82 game schedule, from game 1 to game 82, we want the same goddamn effort. We want this. Yeah. The minute we see a drop, we're like, get the fuck out of here. That is not, there's no way we're going to accept that. And that's with all sports.
Yeah. If you want to be liked here in Philadelphia, you got to have a tremendous work ethic. You got to be somewhat of a tough player. You know, you got to have character. They read right through that right away here in Philadelphia. They don't stand for anything less.
I'll tell you a guy that sort of is, who will end up being a guy that if he stays afterwards. I always tell athletes when I did a lot of bodyguarding, and as you know, and oh, by the way, here's I'm going to see a good picture of me and the Chief. That was like 1999 or something like that. I think that was.
I think it's older than that.
Yeah. Well, you still were rocking the mullet. I can't do that anymore. But what Jason Kelsey, the center for the Eagles.
Yeah.
He's a guy that he hasn't had, I mean, he's consistently been a very good player, but he had 2 or 3 years where he really wasn't at the top of his game, but his effort was always like, he looked like he was giving everything he had. So no one really rode him hard.
Right.
But because they knew that even if you're not producing at the highest level that you have in the past, if you look like you're trying to produce at the highest level you did in the past, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe you got a nagging injury, or like there's always, we're willing to go there for them. But it's the ones where, you know, a quarterback or running back or wide receiver for the Eagles, they have 3 games in a row where they have 10 catches for 150 yards, and then they're non-existent for 3 games. Well, then we're going to call bullshit on that. That's just how it works. And I think in certain sports, I think probably Midwest where you're at, there's a lot more patience to the evolution of a season, and knowing that it takes a while to get chemistry and for the guys to get their understanding who's going to be where and do what and rust or whatever other excuse we want to come up with. They're willing to allow those potentials to be the reason why things aren't going as well as maybe they would hoped. Here,
I agree with that totally. There's a lot more patience where we're at in St. Louis than there is here, for sure. With the play or with the player, the way he's playing, or with the team, how the season's going, they have a lot more patience for sure. Plus, too, if you think about it, the media and the radio and things like the sports radio around here in Philadelphia and the media, they're a lot more, they can be negative at times, and they love that stuff. That's part of it all. And I think there's less of that in St. Louis than there is here for sure. And, when you're on that sports radio every day and they're talking the way they are, that makes fans think differently and feel differently, That's a big part of it.
Well, I mean, media in general is an influencer of emotion.
Yeah.
So
they're a big influence on the fans here in Philadelphia.
And I, there's some radio. I listen to all the sports radio. I'm an addict, but I listen to it more for the entertainment value than I do the sports insight. Because I think I'm an educated guy, and I look at box scores and I look at penalty minutes. I look at ice time. Like I'm trying to figure out, all right, how did he have a -2 for the game? And I'll see their correlation between penalty minutes and there's all these different variables that come into end results. So I love doing that, where most people aren't like me. They're sort of fueled by the media frenzy or lack thereof, depending on what's happening in their sports town.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me ask you one last question. I know your time.
No problem.
Get back to the family, but if you had a clean slate, and I don't know how old you were when you were figured out that the NHL was a potential, but you had, from that moment when you knew that hockey was going to be a career, would you have changed anything about your playing career and your coaching career if you had a chance to wipe it clean?
From a playing standpoint, I think I would probably have, maybe worked on my career a little bit differently as a player. I think I would have, knowing what I know now and the way I watch these athletes now and what they have going on, I would have worked a lot more on my game in the off season rather than just training. I would have done a lot more hockey stuff and became a better player. I think that if I look back, I could have been a better player in the NHL if I would have pushed a little bit more at working on my game, or even pushing a coach to give me a better opportunity, and not just accepting my role as what I was, So I think if I look back, I think I could have been a little bit of a better player. Not a lot, but a little bit better of a player. From the coaching standpoint, I'm not sure I'd change a whole lot. I think, you gotta put in the time, and I put in the time, and as you put in the time, you learn over time different things that are going to help you in your coaching career. And I don't think there's a whole lot I would change about my coaching career. Now, I wish I wouldn't have got fired here in Philadelphia. I think I deserved another opportunity, another year. I didn't like how that ended, but that's the way it goes. If you don't make the playoffs, there's a chance you could get fired. That's the way it is in any sport.
All right, one last caveat. I want to add one more on that, because that as you were answering it opened up another question for me. Who was, if there's more than one, the top 3 people that influenced you throughout your career that you draw from now as a coach to be a better leader, to be a better strategizer, to be a better time manager, whatever the things that are your strengths? Who are 3 people that you feel influenced that the most throughout your career?
Well, I think starting here in Philadelphia, when I was a player, Rick Tocchet had a huge influence on me, who's a coach now. And we talk to each other daily or weekly about coaching and everything. And I think we really feed off each other. He really took me under his wing as a player here, taught me a lot as a young guy. And, he was fairly young himself. But so I think he's obviously one. Dale Hunter. I went to Wash, and Dale and I became real good friends. And that's probably why I coach, is because playing with him, we watched a lot of hockey together and really just talked about, different scenarios and coaching and things like that. And he's a coach, coaches the London Knights junior team up in Canada. He owns that team, but he's a coach. And again, I keep in contact with him, weekly, daily, about things, coaching, different scenarios that come up. And I have to say, Ken Hitchcock's had a big influence on me in my career. As a player, for somewhat, I played for Hitch in junior and in pro a little bit. But as a coach, I think I talked to Hitch a lot about coaching still. And being around him in Philadelphia, learned a lot about coaching through him. And still call him and talk to him about things when it comes to coaching.
That's a great list. I think, Talkie Hockey is legendary here. One of my favorite players of all time. Dale Hunter was an amazing player. And I think Ken Hitchcock he's known for being great and then getting fired. Like that seems to be his thing.
Well, he runs thin. That's what happens after 3 or 4 years. It's just it gets old with the players a little bit. Not old so much, but it just wears on him. He's hard on players. He's demanding. It's every day. It's nonstop hockey. That's everything to him. He doesn't really have much other than that. It's all hockey, 24/7. So eventually, that just wears a little bit thin over time with the players.
Well, he's the guy, though, that I looked at when they fired him. I was like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, I love Hitchcock. And everywhere he goes, he's never not done well. And,
he's done well everywhere.
And that's a sign of a guy that understands, and whatever the player relationship, I get it. But when it comes to understanding that, and that's why I think when you named him as your third person, why you're probably having as much success as you're having as a coach is because you have – a Rick Tocchet who's done the same thing, was a player, now a coach, and Dale Hunter, who's obviously was a fantastic player, and you'd spend a lot of time just talking about hockey. And Hitch is just one of those guys that you can just tell his brain works on a whole different level than everyone else.
Yeah, definitely. He's a smart guy. And again, it's all hockey 24/7 with him. So he's, you can pick his brain. You can learn a lot from him for sure.
Well, hang tight, buddy. I'm going to close out the show. We'll talk off the air for a couple minutes. Everybody, thank you very much for tuning into this COVID-19 special of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. Thank you to my guest, Coach Craig Berube, former Flyer great, NHL St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup champion head coach. Everybody, if you're suffering emotionally, if you're having some stress, if you're wondering how this is all going to play out with this COVID-19, trust me when I tell you, the end is in sight. There are many other people throughout the history of our nation that have suffered much greater consequences than what we have being locked in our houses and away from our families for 6 weeks. As a people, we can get through this. And I appreciate everybody doing their part to make sure we can get back to some level of normalcy. And pretty soon we're going to see your big mug on the TV in the bench with the St. Louis Blues watching some hockey. And I appreciate it. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night, and go out and be kind to one another.